Hi, everybody. Welcome to Call with Us. My name is Paul Golan. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, and our pluralistic social justice initiative is Jews for Secular Democracy. I'm joined today by our Strategy Director, Sarah Levin, who is also Principal at Secular Strategies, and Katie Ryder is our National Director. She won't be speaking, but she's here to offer support if needed. And today we're going to be calling on a really interesting resolution that was introduced into the House that speaks directly to the mission of Jews for Secular Democracy, which is about church-state separation. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. First, I want to give a thank you and a shout out to a group called Jews for Freedom, which gave us a grant to help support our work for this program. They are a new kind of umbrella organizing group pulling in Jewish social justice initiatives from across the denominations, based on the recognition that democratic norms are being challenged in all directions in America today, and Jews have a unique perspective to speak up about it, which is very much what Jews for Secular Democracy has been doing, focused on church-state separation. So before I get into the background of what we're specifically calling about today, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk about how we make calls to our elected officials. But before we do that, let me just ask, and this is in no way meant to shame anybody, but just out of curiosity, has anyone here not ever called their elected representative? Is this the first time for anybody? Because that's part of our goal, is to find people who never have and show them how easy and important it is to do this. But if everybody has done it before, it will mean that Sarah is just providing a bunch of reminders and we don't have to go into too much depth on that. But it's great to see a group of veteran activists. So thank you all for being here. I'll turn it over to Sarah, and then I'll come back and talk about what it is we're calling about today.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And nobody's here for the first time, is that right? I didn't see anything in the chat, no hands raised. So, okay, great. Well, then I will go through this very quickly since you all already know what you're doing here. So I put in the chat here, the first document is the advocacy basics, which you can review, and I'll go through very quickly right now. The second document is the talking points on the resolution, which Paul is going to go over with us. So you have both of those in the chat. So since we do have a bunch of veteran activists here, I won't go through all the details, but I think one of the most important things to remember is that elected officials work for us. We pay their salaries. The work that we're doing today is part of just participating in democracy, and it's it is the obligation and the duty of elected officials to listen to their constituents. And your voice is your superpower. So not only do we have a right, given that we pay their salaries and they are there to represent us, to make our voices heard. Um, Phone calls and in-person meetings are some of the least common ways that everyday folks engage with their elected officials, which means that the squeaky wheels really do get the grease. There's a lot of folks that never contact their elected officials, but for those who do, often it's through action alerts, which we also do, which is also effective. But basically, the kind of hierarchy of what is most effective, the absolutely most effective, is when you meet in person with an elected official or their staff in their district office or in their DC office. Second after that is the phone calls, because it is personal. You actually have to pick up the phone. You actually talk to somebody or leave a voicemail, and they do actually listen to those voicemails. They do actually take a note and pass it on to their boss. Having interned in a Senate office on the Hill, and Katie can speak to this as well, having worked for elected officials, truly, there is a meeting, a process by which every office is all the staff are reporting to the boss, to the elected official, usually on a weekly basis, but whatever their routine is of what the calls were this week, what were the emails that were sent, and what were they about. And this is particularly important when it comes to hot topic controversial issues. A great example I like to remind folks of is when Betsy DeVos was almost not confirmed, right? You remember that from the first Trump administration. A lot of offices that were on the fence were literally tallying how many calls they were getting for and against her at that time. And so it really does make a difference. They take note of these things. So Now that we remember why this is so important, that every call really is tallied, just a quick review on how we do this. So first of all, we are only calling our elected officials, right? It can be tempting to want to call leadership or other offices, but at the end of the day, the offices that are going to be responsive to you are the ones for which you are a constituent. And that's why it's very important. And we always say in our talking points that I'm a constituent, or we mention what part of the district we're in or provide our address, because we are the ones that can, in the next election, vote them in or vote them out. And so that's what makes our voices powerful as a constituent. We have in the call with us advocacy basics, and then it looks like Katie is putting it in the chat as well. Links to look up who your elected officials are. So you have, unless you live in Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico or one of the other territories, you will have two U.S. senators and a U.S. House of Representatives, a representative of the U.S. House of Representatives. So you want to first know who you're calling today, because we're going to call two U.S. senators and one representative. We are calling about a resolution that also has a certain number of co-sponsors. So before you make your calls, you're going to want to just check that to see if your representative is already a co-sponsor. Because if they are a co-sponsor, you're going to be thanking them for co-sponsor, not asking them to co-sponsor. On the House side, you're going to be calling people and urge, if they are not already on the resolution, and in which case you're thanking them, you're going to be urging them to co-sponsor the resolution. We don't have a resolution in the Senate yet. So the ask is going to be a little bit different. You're going to be raising awareness about this resolution, why you support it, and urging them, your US Senator, to consider sponsoring a companion resolution. So once you know who your elected officials are, you know what your ask is, whether it's a thank you or it's a please co-sponsor or please introduce. Just a quick reminder, the person who picks up the phone is a gatekeeper, right? It doesn't matter whether they are the legislative director or an intern, that person is going to be responsible whether your message gets through or not. So please be polite, please be nice. Generally speaking, they're always going to be polite with you. We don't have any real concerns that anyone here is going to be threatening or rude, but that's just always a important reminder to be very polite with those folks because they are gatekeepers. If your call is not picked up, please do leave a voicemail. I could tell you from personal experience, I do actually listen to those voicemails and you might actually get a call back or an email back. So use the same talking points, maybe shorten them a little bit and just make sure that you're mentioning your constituent, that you mention why you're calling, what the ask is, and one or two reasons as to why it matters to you. That's pretty much the same whether it's a person you're speaking to or leaving a voicemail. But again, there's no one on the other end with a voicemail asking you where you live and all those things. So especially when you leave a voicemail, make sure you have those components that your constituent mentioned, what part of the state you're from. You can do the full address, or you can just state kind of the part of town that you're in, just again to signal that you're a constituent. Make sure you tell them why you're calling. I'm calling to urge you to co-sponsor or to consider sponsoring or to thank you for co-sponsoring House Resolution 773 and the one or two reasons. If you're talking to a live person, they might ask you for your address. If you tell them what part of town you're from, they might ask you for the specifics. That's again just so that they probably have a record of you in their system and they want to assign your comment to that address. So go ahead and provide that. And at the end, of course, thank them for their time. Most people are just going to listen and take notes. Occasionally, they might ask for a little bit more information, but generally they're trying to get it done as quickly as possible and get the basic information, who you are, where you live, what you're calling about, and your contact information. And I think given that it seems like everyone's done this before, and we want to get you to your calls as quickly as possible, I'm going to stop there. Paul's going to go through the talking points. Again, just remember your constituent, your address, what your ask is, and the one or two things that speak to you as to why you support the resolution. And do leave those voicemails when you get the voicemail box. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks. Yeah, let's save questions. If you have questions about how to do it, we'll have time for that. I want to talk a little bit about why to do it. I put in the chat the actual resolution, which is worth looking over very quickly for two reasons. First is that right at the top, the second paragraph identifies the co-sponsors, right? Ansari, Huffman, Raskin, Ballant. You want to make sure that if you're calling one of these reps, you're saying thank you and you're not asking them to co-sponsor something they're already co-sponsoring. But the resolution itself is really interesting because it is both generally in support of separation of church and state, and then specifically in support of a couple of really interesting anniversaries that I don't know that most Americans are aware of. But President John F. Kennedy, some of you who are like a year or two older than me may remember that he being a Catholic was a real issue in his presidential candidacy. There was accusations that he would be taking orders from the Pope, right? That it's almost hard to imagine today, but at that time it was a real concern and he had to address it. And he gave this magnificent speech 65 years ago about separation of church and state. But of course, we have a long history of our political leaders who believed in the separation of church and state. And this resolution also acknowledges the 150th anniversary of Ulysses S. Grant's speech, where he talked about it and mentions many of the founding fathers who were very specific about the goals of separation of church and state, which is now trying to be erased and trying to be there's a lot of revisionist history around this when it is very clear what the ideals were around church-state separation by our founding fathers. So as you go through this resolution, it's text that I think we can all be supportive of and proud of, and something that certainly if you don't see the name of your congressperson as a co-sponsor already, something that we should all feel strongly about them at least reading and at least being aware of all of the information that's in here. We also provided a link in the chat earlier, and I'll just put it in there again, to our talking points. Here they are, which is suggestions, right? You want to be brief, but you also want to give a reason or two for why this is so important to you to have your elected official co-sponsor. And so, at the very least, as you see at the bottom with the sample call language, you want to give your name, as Sarah had mentioned, and so on. But then, as far as the talking points specific to this resolution, you can talk about your support for the separation of church and state. You can bring in your own personal story as if you're part of a religious minority, as Jews in America are, or if you're part of any religious minority, you can talk about how separation of church and state has been so important to your community. And this resolution specifically names white Christian nationalism, and that is a great concern for many of us, and that is something that you may want to bring up as well, and talk about your concerns. So you can look at the talking points, you can look at the resolution itself, and hopefully we can get a whole bunch more co-sponsors to join on to this resolution. And if you are cynical like I am at times, and you feel like, well, this resolution is never going to pass a House that is a majority of a party that wants to break down the walls of separation of church and state, I will say that this is something that I'm not cynical about because we know the impact of our voices being heard can change policy, can affect the way that our elected representatives vote on things or at least see things. So the talking points Katie also put into the chat. So that's kind of the overview of how to do it, why to do it. We'll pause for a moment if folks have questions before we go make our calls. Any questions, either you can share them in the chat or you can just, we're a small enough group for you to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Paul, I saw a question from Steve asking if what's the level of acceptance for this type of legislation in the current environment. And that's really what this is all about. Right now, we have 20 co-sponsors. But first of all, there's more than 20 members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and there are certainly more than 30 plus members of the US Congress who support separation of church and state. And part of what this is about, you have to remember, is that There's a lot of things going on in any given time. There's a shutdown negotiation, for example, right now. And sometimes this kind of work is about getting our allies to be champions, right? We have a lot of allies in church state separation, but it's on us to bump this up in terms of priority as well, because there's a lot of members that really should be co-sponsors of this resolution who haven't. And it's not because they're not allies in church state separation, it's because they need to be cultivated as champions of church state separation. And the amount of this is very much getting folks on the record as well. And the current dynamics that we have aren't going to be our dynamics forever, right? And a lot of the work that we do is the long game. But you cannot expect, even when you have a different political makeup, that all of a sudden your issue rises to the top. You have to do the work up until that point to make sure that you're cultivating those champions and not just kind of relying on an assumption that you have these allies who are going to really prioritize this issue. So really the goal is for every elected office that is an ally to church state separation, of which again there are many, many, many more than 20. We want to get them on the record and for them to understand that there's a constituency for which this is very important. And this is actually a very easy ask for an office to just sign on as a co-sponsor. It's a really easy win for them. But it's important for us because then we have them on the record as a co-sponsor for a resolution that is really, really aligned with our values.
And that's great. And I would just add one additional piece, which is if you are calling a representative who you feel would be hostile to this, in talking about church-state separation, this is not about protecting our rights over anyone else's rights. This is about protecting everyone's rights, even the right to be a white Christian nationalist if you want to be, right? That is protected by separation of church and state. The point is that a religion, and particularly a minority religion like Christian nationalism is, even though most Americans are Christian, most Americans are not Christian nationalists. Um, they don't get to dictate legislation to everyone else. That is freedom of and from religion, right? That is the two clauses of the First Amendment that we want both enforced, right? People are free to do religion as they see fit or not, as long as it doesn't impinge on anybody else's rights. And that's really what this resolution is about, is recognizing that the government cannot be weaponized on behalf of one religion against other religions, which is frankly what we see happening today. Other
I would add,
question?
I
Yeah.
would just add one quick thing, Paul, again about if you're talking to offices that you think are hostile, um, even just hearing the perspective of someone who supports church state separation as a religious minority, particularly as Jews, that is powerful. You may not change their minds, but even presenting a perspective they haven't heard before can be very impactful. So remember, especially with those offices, to bring in the Jewish values because that staffer who's going to pass on the note may have never heard that perspective before. That's important.
Great. So what we'd like to do now is pause for about 8 minutes while we all go make our calls, but stay on Zoom. If questions come up, you can unmute yourself at any time because we'll be here. But make the calls. We'll give everyone like 8 minutes, and at 1:30, I'd love to hear what your experience has been, whether you got a live person or a recording, how it went, etc. And then we'll go eat our lunch or whatever you're going to do next.
And we're here if you have any questions in the meantime.
Sarah, hi, it's Mark. How do we find out whether they're co-sponsors or not?
Let me throw the link in there for you.
Because you said that's important to know. So, yeah.
Yes, it is. Thank you for asking. So here is the list of co-sponsors. And on the left-hand side, you'll see it's organized by state, if that makes it easier for you to check.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, do we need another couple of minutes or does anyone want to share how it went? I just got answering machines. Did anybody get a live person? Or just answering machines?
This is Amy Raffalo calling from Durham. I did get a live person in Fushi's office to thank her. She co-sponsors already. Um, and the staffer who answered the phone was very nice. I also left messages with our senators, Bud and Tillis, who I don't have a whole lot of hope for, but you know, we can always try. And there I left messages.
Great. Thank
That's
you.
great.
Thanks for doing
That's
that.
great. They get an opportunity to thank the representative. They don't hear thank you a lot, so they really do appreciate it. It's a great way to reinforce uh, that this is important and they should keep doing things like this. So thank you for doing that.
I didn't get anybody live, but I did leave messages for both senators from Arizona. And I feel like that might be something at least Mark Kelly would be willing to introduce. And it would be very visible, I think, if he did so. So I think it puts an idea in their staffer's head. They might run with something like that.
Mhm. And who's your rep?
My senators?
Your rep, representative.
Oh, my rep, I didn't bother calling Juan Ciscomani. I think much more likely to get one of the senators to do something.
Hmm. Okay. You can call him anyway.
They hear
Plant.
from me weekly.
Oh yeah.
I'm already in the frequent flyer category there.
Any other experiences, positive, negative, answering machines? Folks need another minute. Are you still on the calls? I see Mark is working away at it.
There. I just did it, Paul.
Answering machines?
No, I talked to an intern, a live person who was very cooperative.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, she couldn't find the bill right away. She said a different name. I went, uh-oh. So I was trying to give her a name and checked here, and I told her, and then she did find it. And I asked him, I said he would, knowing him, he'd be very inclined to be a co-sponsor. So I'd really appreciate it if you'd ask him to do that for us. I feel very strongly about it. Told him why. And then I did mention, being the president of FFRF Cincinnati Metro chapter. And also, and you would know about this, of course, being on the Beth Adam separation of church and state team. So I said, if there's anything he would like to contact me about regarding those things, I'd be very glad to do that. And she took my number.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent advocacy. Great. Anybody else want to chime in before we let you all go for the day? This is a really unique and interesting one because it's so general in some ways, and yet it speaks to so much of what's happening right now. So as I think Sarah already said, it seems like a pretty easy win for folks to sign on to if they believe as we do. So hopefully this will my rep absolutely should be on this. And I peer shamed him by naming the other Nadler in New York is already signed on, so I mentioned that. So hopefully there'll be some peer pressure there. Um, anyone else want to chime in before we go? All
I
right,
just
well,
want,
yeah,
yeah, just
yeah.
want to thank you. This was very helpful.
Sure, we're trying to do this at least once a month on important issues. As you can see, we try to get through this between 30 and 40 minutes so people don't have to spend a whole ton of time on it.
Yeah.
It really is, just educate yourself real quick on what the issue is, make the calls. It really does ultimately have an impact, particularly if we can get some critical mass. So if this is of interest to you and you want to share it with people that you know, please invite them.
I
You're
will.
already probably on our list. So please share that, and we'll see you again next month. We'll let you
I
know.
want to say next month,
Mhm.
our call with us, and I don't have the date in front of me, but you will get the information, is going to be protecting freedom to read and against book bans and censorship in public education. And there's a bill we're going to be talking against, and there's a bill we're going to be for. So we're going to be sending you that information really shortly. June 1st, we're going to be calling with Keshet again on protecting our trans friends and the LGBTQ plus community. So keep a lookout for both of those next call with us.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day, and thanks for your advocacy.
Thanks, Sarah. You did a great job, by the way.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind. Thanks for being here.
Take
Okay.
care, everyone.